The bustling city of New Horizon, capital of the human colony on the distant planet Arcadia, had fallen eerily silent. Its once vibrant streets were now lined with somber faces, the air thick with an uneasy anticipation. For it was here, in the grand courthouse at the heart of the city, that the fate of the alien invaders would be decided. Michael Donovan, the colony's chief prosecutor, paced nervously in his office, reviewing the mountain of evidence against the captive alien officers. Their brutality had been unrelenting. Massacres of civilian populations, the use of banned chemical weapons, the summary executions of prisoners of war. The crimes were horrific, the scale of devastation staggering. Yet, despite the outrage that had swept through the colony in the wake of the invasion, Donovan knew this trial would be no easy task. The alien officers, led by the imperious Commander Vrax, would mount a fierce defense. They would seek to shift the blame, to argue that their actions were justified by the exigencies of war and the cultural norms of their own species. Donovan clenched his fist, determined to ensure that justice would prevail. "These monsters will pay for their crimes," he muttered under his breath. "I'll make sure of it." As he made his way to the courthouse, Donovan couldn't help but notice the growing crowds gathered outside, their signs and chants calling for the swift execution of the alien officers. The human colonists, having endured unimaginable suffering, were in no mood for leniency. Stepping into the grand hall, Donovan took a deep breath and surveyed the imposing courtroom. The alien prisoners, clad in shackles, sat impassively at the defendant's table, their eyes betraying a glimmer of contempt. Across the aisle, the team of human defense lawyers, led by the renowned Olivia Sinclair, regarded Donovan with a measured gaze. As the judge, a venerable figure with a stern countenance, took his seat, the proceedings began. Donovan rose to deliver the opening statement, his voice ringing with conviction. For too long, the citizens of Arcadia have lived in the shadow of the alien invaders. We have endured their cruelty, their disregard for human life and dignity. But today, we stand before this court to demand justice. Justice for the countless lives lost, the families torn apart, the communities devastated by the actions of these defendants. Donovan paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. The evidence we will present will leave no doubt as to the guilt of these men. Their hands are stained with the blood of innocents, their souls blackened by the atrocities they have committed. They will answer for their crimes, and this trial will serve as a stark reminder that humanity will not be subjugated, that we will not be broken by those who seek to destroy us. As Donovan sat down, a murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. The defense lawyers, however, remained impassive, their expressions betraying neither emotion nor concern. It was then that Commander Vrax rose, his towering frame commanding the attention of all present. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational, belying the gravity of the charges against him. "Esteemed members of the court, we have come before you today to defend not only ourselves, but the very principles that guide our people. We are not here to deny the actions taken during the conflict. That would be a disservice to the truth. But we are here to provide context, to explain the factors that shaped our decisions and the realities of the battlefield." Vrax paused, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "You humans speak of justice, of crimes against your kind. But understand this. From our perspective, it is you who have committed the greater transgressions. You dared to encroach upon our territories, to establish colonies on worlds that rightfully belonged to the Imperium. Your presence was an affront, a violation of the natural order that we were sworn to uphold." The alien commander's words were met with a stunned silence, save for the soft murmurs of disbelief that rippled through the gallery. Donovan felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that the true battle would be waged in the coming days, when the evidence was presented and the true nature of the aliens' crimes would be laid bare. As Vrax continued to outline the aliens' justifications for their actions, Donovan couldn't help but wonder. How would the human colonists, so scared by the invasion, react to this twisted logic? And more importantly, would the court be swayed by the aliens' arguments, or would justice prevail in the end? The air in the courtroom was thick with tension as Prosecutor Donovan rose to begin presenting the case against the alien officers. Despite Vrax's boldly defiant opening statement, Donovan was confident that the overwhelming evidence would leave no doubt as to the defendant's guilt. Donovan began by recounting the events leading up to the invasion of Arcadia, the initial contact with the alien Imperium, the diplomatic overtures that had been summarily rejected, and the ultimatum that had ultimately led to the devastating attack on the human colony. The defendants claimed that our very presence on Arcadia was an affront to their natural order, Donovan stated, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. But make no mistake, this was a premeditated act of aggression, an unprovoked assault on a peaceful settlement. Donovan then proceeded to methodically lay out the litany of war crimes committed by Vrax and his fellow officers. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting harrowing tales of civilian massacres, the use of banned chemical weapons, and the summary execution of prisoners of war. The images displayed on the courtroom's giant view screens were nothing short of horrifying. Charred bodies, shattered homes, and the anguished faces of those who had somehow survived the alien onslaught. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as the true scale of the devastation was laid bare. Vrax and his companions, however, remained impassive, their expressions betraying no hint of remorse or emotion. Olivia Sinclair, the lead defense counsel, occasionally conferred with her clients, but otherwise maintained a stoic demeanor. As the testimony continued, Donovan could feel the weight of the evidence bearing down on the alien officers. The crimes were so heinous, the suffering they had inflicted so immense, that even the most hardened legal mind would struggle to mount a convincing defense. Yet, when it was Sinclair's turn to cross-examine the witnesses, a chill ran down Donovan's spine. The defense lawyer's questions were sharp, probing, and relentless, as she sought to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative. Witness, you claimed that the alien forces deliberately targeted civilian populations, Sinclair began, her voice calm and measured. But is it not true that in the heat of battle, mistakes can sometimes be made? That the fog of war can lead to tragic and unintended consequences? The witness, a shell-shocked young woman, hesitated, her resolve wavering under Sinclair's assault. I suppose that's possible, but the destruction was so widespread, so methodical. It couldn't have been an accident. Sinclair pounced. But you cannot say for certain, can you? After all, you were not present at every engagement, were you not? How can you be sure that the alien commanders did not make every effort to minimize civilian casualties, as is the custom of their people? Donovan felt his stomach twist as he watched the witness falter, her certainty crumbling under Sinclair's relentless questioning. The defense lawyer was a master of her craft, and she was clearly intent on sowing doubt in the minds of the judges. As the cross-examination continued, Donovan could see the same pattern emerging with other witnesses. Sinclair would seize upon the slightest inconsistency or uncertainty, using it to cast aspersions on the prosecution's case. It was a deft and ruthless strategy, one that threatened to undermine the overwhelming evidence against the alien officers. Donovan gritted his teeth, his hands clenching into fists. He had known this trial would be a formidable challenge, but he had not anticipated the sheer tenacity and skill of the defense. The stakes were high, not just for the fate of the alien officers, but for the very future of the human colony on Arcadia. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Donovan couldn't help but wonder, had he and his team underestimated the defense's resolve? And more importantly, would the judges be swayed by Sinclair's relentless assault on the prosecution's case? As the trial entered its third day, the tension in the grand courtroom had reached a fever pitch. Prosecutor Donovan knew that the stakes had never been higher, not just for the fate of the alien officers, but for the very future of the human colony on Arcadia. Donovan took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the packed gallery. The human colonists, their faces etched with a mix of anger and anguish, were watching the proceedings with rapt attention. They had come to see justice served, to bear witness to the reckoning of those responsible for the devastation that had befallen their home. But as Donovan glanced over at the defense table, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Olivia Sinclair, the lead counsel for the alien officers, was a formidable adversary, her sharp intellect and unyielding determination proving to be a formidable challenge to the prosecution's case. Today, we will hear testimony from some of the most senior officers in the human militia, Donovan announced, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. These individuals were on the front lines of the invasion, and they will provide first-hand accounts of the atrocities committed by the defendants. As the first witness, a grizzled veteran named Captain Alara took the stand. Donovan felt a surge of cautious optimism. Alara's reputation as a skilled and courageous leader was known throughout the colony, and her testimony promised to be a powerful indictment of the alien officer's actions. Alara's account was harrowing, a vivid and unflinching recollection of the horrors she and her troops had witnessed. She described the ruthless bombardment of civilian neighborhoods, the use of incendiary weapons that had reduced entire blocks to smoldering ruins, and the summary executions of surrendering soldiers. As Alara's testimony unfolded, the gallery erupted in a chorus of gasps and cries of anguish. Donovan could see the judges leaning forward, their expressions grave, as they absorbed the grim details of the atrocities. But just as the prosecution seemed to be gaining the upper hand, Sinclair rose to cross-examine the witness. Donovan braced himself, knowing that the defense lawyer would not hold back. "Captain Alara," Sinclair began, her voice calm and measured, "you have described a harrowing series of events, and I have no doubt that your experiences on the battlefield have left you deeply scared. However, I must ask you to consider the possibility that your perceptions may have been colored by the fog of war, by the sheer chaos and brutality of the combat you witnessed." Alara's brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing as she regarded the defense lawyer. "Colored by the fog of war. These were not isolated incidents, Ms. Sinclair. The alien forces deliberately and systematically targeted civilian populations, using tactics that were clearly in violation of any accepted laws of warfare." Sinclair nodded, her expression almost sympathetic. "I understand your conviction, Captain, but can you say with absolute certainty that the alien commanders were aware of these supposed violations? Might it not be possible that they were simply following the protocols and customs of their own military doctrine?" Donovan watched as Alara struggled to find the words to respond, her frustration evident. The defense lawyer was once again sowing seeds of doubt, calling into question the very foundations of the prosecution's case. As the cross-examination continued, Donovan could feel the momentum shifting. Sinclair's relentless questioning, her ability to poke holes in even the most seemingly ironclad testimony, was gradually eroding the impact of the prosecution's evidence. Donovan gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to anticipate Sinclair's next move. He knew that he and his team had to find a way to regain control of the narrative, to counter the defense's insidious strategy before it was too late. The fate of the alien officers and the future of the human colony on Arcadia hung in the balance, and Donovan was determined to ensure that justice would prevail. But as the day's proceedings drew to a close, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the trial was slipping through his fingers. As the trial entered its fourth day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Prosecutor Donovan knew that he and his team were facing an uphill battle, with the defense's relentless assault on the prosecution's case threatening to undermine even the most damning evidence. Donovan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge that lay ahead. He knew that he had to find a way to regain the upper hand, to counter Sinclair's cunning strategy before it was too late. Today, we will hear from a witness who was present during one of the most heinous atrocities committed by the alien forces, Donovan announced, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. This individual will provide a first-hand account of the massacre at the Arcadian refugee camp, where hundreds of innocent civilians were ruthlessly slaughtered. As the witness, a young woman named Emily Nguyen, took the stand, Donovan could see the pain and anguish etched across her features. Her hands trembled slightly as she recounted the horrors she had witnessed, her voice wavering with emotion. The alien soldiers came in the middle of the night, without warning. Nguyen began, her eyes glistening with unused tears. They herded us all into the center of the camp, separating the men, women, and children. And then, they opened fire. Donovan listened, his heart heavy, as Nguyen described the chaos and carnage that had unfolded, the screams of the dying mingling with the thunder of the alien weapons. She spoke of watching her own family, her parents, and younger siblings, cut down without mercy, their lifeless bodies strewn across the blood-stained ground. As Nguyen's testimony progressed, the gallery erupted in a chorus of gasps and cries of anguish. Donovan could see the judges leaning forward, their expressions a mixture of horror and sympathy. But just as the prosecution seemed to be gaining the upper hand, Sinclair rose to cross-examine the witness. Donovan braced himself, knowing that the defense lawyer would not hold back. "Miss Nguyen," Sinclair began, her voice soft and almost soothing, "I understand that this must be an incredibly difficult experience for you to recount. No one should have to endure such unspeakable tragedy. But I must ask you, are you certain that the alien soldiers were solely responsible for this atrocity?" Nguyen's brow furrowed, her expression one of confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean? I saw them with my own eyes, gunning down the innocent people in the camp." Sinclair nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I have no doubt that you believe what you saw, Miss Nguyen. But you must understand that in the chaos of battle, things are not always as they appear. Might it not be possible that the human militia, perhaps in an attempt to turn the tide of the invasion, staged this tragic event to garner sympathy and support?" Donovan felt his blood boil as he watched Nguyen's face crumble, the young woman's certainty visibly shaken by Sinclair's insinuation. The defense lawyer was once again sowing seeds of doubt, casting aspersions on the very foundation of the prosecution's case. As the cross-examination continued, Donovan could see the judges beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sinclair's skillful manipulation of the testimony, her ability to cast doubt on even the most harrowing evidence, was clearly having an impact. Donovan knew he had to act quickly, to find a way to counter Sinclair's strategy before it was too late. But as he frantically reviewed the prosecution's evidence, a sense of unease began to creep into his mind. What if the defense lawyer was right? What if there were gaps or inconsistencies in the case that he and his team had overlooked? The stakes were too high, the future of the human colony on Arcadia hanging in the balance. For him to take any chances, Donovan made a decision, one that would prove to be a significant gamble. He rose, his expression resolute, and addressed the judges. "Your Honors, the prosecution would like to request a recess in order to thoroughly review our evidence and ensure that we are presenting the most comprehensive and accurate case possible." As the courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs, Donovan steeled himself for the backlash. But he knew that he had no choice. The future of the human colony depended on him getting this right. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of voices as Prosecutor Donovan's unexpected request for a recess sent shockwaves through the gallery. The human colonists, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and anger, voiced their displeasure, while the alien officers and their defense team watched the proceedings with a calculated detachment. As the judges conferred quietly, Donovan could feel the weight of everyone's scrutiny bearing down on him. He knew that this decision could make or break the prosecution's case, and the stakes had never been higher. Finally, the head judge, a stern-faced man named Holden, rose to address the court. "The judges have considered the prosecutor's request, and we have decided to grant a recess of 48 hours. The trial will reconvene at that time." Donovan let out a silent sigh of relief, though he could see the disappointment and frustration etched on the faces of the human colonists. He understood their anger, their desire for swift justice, but he also knew that the future of their entire colony was hanging in the balance. As the courtroom emptied, Donovan hurried to his office, his mind racing. He had to make the most of this precious time, to comb through every piece of evidence, to ensure that there were no gaps or inconsistencies that the defense could exploit. Summoning his top legal team, Donovan laid out the situation in blunt terms. "We're facing an uphill battle here, people. Sinclair's cross-examinations have been ruthless, and she's managed to sow doubt even in the most damning testimony. We can't afford any mistakes. The future of our colony depends on us getting this right." The team nodded, their expressions grim but determined. They knew the stakes as well as Donovan did, and they were all too aware of the consequences of failure. For the next 2 days, they worked tirelessly, poring over the evidence, double-checking their facts, and rehearsing their strategy for the trial's resumption. Donovan was relentless, pushing his team to the brink of exhaustion, but he knew that they had no choice. As the recess drew to a close, Donovan steeled himself for the confrontation to come. He knew that Sinclair would be waiting, ready to pounce on any perceived weakness in the prosecution's case. When the trial resumed, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Donovan could feel the eyes of the human colonists upon him, their expressions a mix of hope and trepidation. "Your Honors," Donovan began, his voice clear and confident, "the prosecution is ready to continue our case against the defendants." He then proceeded to call a series of new witnesses, each one meticulously prepared to withstand the defense's cross-examination. As the testimony unfolded, Donovan could see Sinclair's brow furrow, her composure visibly shaken. The defense lawyer had clearly not anticipated the level of preparation and attention to detail that the prosecution had put forth. Witness after witness, their accounts corroborating and reinforcing one another, painted a damning picture of the alien officer's systematic campaign of terror and brutality. Donovan knew that he was finally gaining the upper hand, and he could see the judges leaning forward, their expressions increasingly grave. But just when it seemed that the prosecution had the momentum, Sinclair rose to deliver her own bombshell. "Your Honors, the defense would like to call Commander Vrax to the stand." The courtroom erupted in a stunned silence, and Donovan felt his heart sink. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that the alien commander's testimony could potentially turn the tide of the trial. As Vrax took the stand, his bearing regal and his gaze unwavering, Donovan braced himself for the onslaught. Sinclair's questioning was sharp and precise, as she methodically dismantled the prosecution's case, painting the human colonists as the true aggressors and the alien officers as honorable defenders of their people. Donovan listened, his jaw clenched, as Vrax's words wove a tapestry of justification and moral relativism, subtly shifting the narrative to cast the human side as the villains. The defense lawyer's strategy was becoming clear. She was not just undermining the prosecution's case, but actively reframing the very nature of the conflict. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Donovan knew that he was facing the fight of his life. The fate of the alien officers and the future of the human colony on Arcadia hung in the balance, and he was determined not to let it slip through his fingers. The courtroom was silent as Commander Vrax took the stand, his imposing presence commanding the attention of all present. Prosecutor Donovan felt a knot of tension in the pit of his stomach, knowing that the alien commander's testimony had the potential to drastically alter the course of the trial. As Sinclair began her questioning, Vrax's words flowed with a calculated precision, weaving a narrative that painted the human colonists as the true aggressors in the conflict. "We did not seek this war, esteemed judges," Vrax stated, his gaze sweeping across the room. "It was the humans who dared to encroach upon our rightful territories, to establish their settlements on worlds that rightfully belonged to the Imperium. Our actions were a necessary response to defend our people, our way of life." Donovan gritted his teeth, his knuckles turning white, as he gripped the edge of the prosecution's table. He had expected the defense to mount a vigorous challenge, but the sheer audacity of Vrax's statements caught him off guard. "But the evidence clearly shows that your forces committed numerous war crimes, atrocities that violated even the most basic tenets of civilized warfare," Donovan interjected, his voice laden with barely concealed anger. "How can you possibly justify the systematic massacre of civilian populations, the use of banned chemical weapons?" Vrax regarded Donovan with an almost pitying expression. You humans are so quick to judge, to label our actions as war crimes. But you fail to understand the reality of the situation, the cultural and strategic imperatives that guided our decision-making. The alien commander leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. From our perspective, it was the human colonists who were the true transgressors, the ones who disrupted the natural order of the galaxy. We gave you ample warning to withdraw, to acknowledge the Imperium's rightful claim to these worlds. But you refused, forcing us to take decisive action. Donovan felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to Vrax's words. The commander's logic, while twisted and morally abhorrent, was eerily compelling. He could see the judges shifting uncomfortably in their seats, their brows furrowed in deep thought. Sinclair seized the momentum, her questioning growing more pointed and aggressive. Witness, you speak of natural order and rightful claims. But is it not true that the Imperium has a long history of subjugating and oppressing other civilizations, of using overwhelming force to expand its sphere of influence? Vrax's expression hardened, but Donovan could detect a flicker of unease in the alien's eyes. The Imperium's methods may at times be harsh, but they are necessary to maintain stability and order across the galaxy. We do not seek to subjugate. We seek to protect our people, our way of life, from those who would seek to disrupt the natural balance. Sinclair pressed on, her words cutting like a knife. So the indiscriminate slaughter of innocent civilians, the use of banned chemical weapons, these are all part of your necessary methods to maintain this natural order. Surely, even by the standards of your own culture, these actions cannot be justified. The courtroom erupted in a murmur of agreement, the human colonists in the gallery visibly shaken by the defense's bold line of questioning. Donovan could feel the momentum shifting once again, and he knew that he had to act quickly to regain control of the narrative. Rising to his feet, Donovan fixed Vrax with a steely gaze. Commander, I ask you directly, do you deny the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution? Do you claim that the atrocities committed by your forces were not in fact war crimes, but rather necessary actions to defend your people? Vrax's expression hardened, his lips tightening into a thin line. I do not deny the actions taken by my soldiers, prosecutor, but I stand by the justifications I have provided. From our perspective, the human colonists were the true aggressors, and our response, however harsh, was a necessary measure to protect the Imperium's interests. Donovan felt a surge of frustration, but he refused to back down. So you admit to the crimes, yet you refuse to take responsibility for them. You claim to uphold a natural order, but your actions have only sown chaos and devastation. How then can this court deem your conduct as anything other than a blatant violation of the most fundamental principles of civilized warfare? The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Donovan's words hung in the air, the judges and the gallery alike awaiting Vrax's response. The alien commander's expression remained impassive, but Donovan could see the faintest glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes. In that moment, Donovan knew that he had to seize the opportunity to drive home the prosecution's case with every ounce of his skill and conviction. The fate of the human colony on Arcadia was at stake, and he was determined to ensure that justice prevailed. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Prosecutor Donovan locked eyes with the impassive alien commander, Vrax. The stakes had never been higher, with the fate of the human colony on Arcadia hanging in the balance. Commander Vrax, Donovan began, his voice calm and measured. You claim that the actions taken by your forces were a necessary defense of your people's rightful territories and way of life. Yet the evidence clearly shows that your troops engaged in systematic, large-scale attacks on civilian populations, acts that, by any standard of civilized warfare, constitute heinous war crimes. Vrax's expression remained stoic, but Donovan could detect a flicker of unease in the alien's eyes. I have already acknowledged the actions taken by my soldiers, prosecutor. However, as I had stated, these were not mere war crimes, but necessary measures to protect the Imperium's interests in the face of your people's unlawful encroachment. Donovan shook his head, his frustration evident. Your necessary measures resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. How can you stand here and claim that such atrocities were justified, even by the standards of your own culture? The alien commander's brow furrowed, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. You humans are so quick to judge, to cast aspersions on our methods without understanding the broader context. The Imperium has a long history of maintaining stability and order across the galaxy. Sometimes, difficult decisions must be made to ensure the greater good. Donovan felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. The greater good. Is that what you call the wholesale slaughter of civilians, the use of banned chemical weapons? Forgive me, Commander, but your difficult decisions have brought nothing but death and devastation to the people of Arcadia. Vrax's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. You speak of death and devastation, Prosecutor, but you fail to acknowledge the role your own people played in provoking this conflict. It was the human colonists who dared to encroach upon our rightful territories, who refused to heed our warnings and withdraw. The blood of those who perished is as much on your hands as it is on ours. The courtroom erupted in a chorus of outraged murmurs, and Donovan could see the judges shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The alien commander's words, while abhorrent, carried a certain twisted logic that threatened to undermine the prosecution's case. Sensing an opportunity, Sinclair rose to her feet, her expression almost sympathetic. Commander Vrax, I understand the difficult position you find yourself in. As representatives of a different culture, it is only natural that there would be a clash of perspectives, a fundamental disagreement over what constitutes justified actions in times of war. Vrax nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You understand, Miss Sinclair. The humans have judged us by their own standards, their own moral framework, without any regard for the realities we face as the guardians of the Imperium's interests. Donovan felt his stomach twist as he watched the defense lawyer deftly steer the conversation, casting the alien officers as the misunderstood victims of cultural misunderstandings. He knew that he had to act quickly to counter this narrative before it gained any more traction. Your Honors, Donovan interjected, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. The prosecution would like to call a witness who can speak to the true nature of the Imperium's expansionist policies and the consequences they have wrought across the galaxy. The judges exchanged a series of quiet glances, and Donovan could see the unease etched on their faces. They were clearly grappling with the complex moral and ethical implications of the trial, and Donovan knew that he had to tread carefully. As the new witness, a veteran diplomat named Samantha Hartley, took the stand, Donovan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Hartley's testimony painted a damning picture of the Imperium's long history of subjugation and oppression, the systematic eradication of entire civilizations in the name of stability and order. Vrax's expression darkened as Hartley's words cut through the carefully crafted narrative he and Sinclair had woven. The alien commander's attempts to justify his actions were slowly unraveling, and Donovan could sense the tide turning in the prosecution's favor. But even as the day's proceedings drew to a close, Donovan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the battle was far from over. Sinclair was a formidable opponent, and he knew that she would not go down without a fight. The future of the human colony on Arcadia hung in the balance, and Donovan was determined to ensure that justice would prevail. The final day of the trial dawned with an air of tension and anticipation that blanketed the grand courtroom. Prosecutor Donovan took a deep, steadying breath as he surveyed the packed gallery, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, some etched with anger, others tinged with a glimmer of hope. The evidence had been presented, the arguments made, and now it all came down to this, the final reckoning, where the judges would weigh the fate of the alien officers and, by extension, the future of the human colony on Arcadia. Donovan knew that the path to this moment had been arduous, marked by Sinclair's relentless assault on the prosecution's case. The defense lawyer had proven to be a formidable adversary, her cunning strategy of sowing doubt and reframing the very nature of the conflict threatening to undermine even the most damning testimony. But Donovan also knew that he and his team had fought tooth and nail, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion to ensure that the truth would prevail. The testimony of Samantha Hartley, the veteran diplomat, had been a critical turning point, shattering the twisted logic that Vrax and Sinclair had sought to weave. As the judges took their seats, the courtroom fell silent, all eyes fixed upon the stern-faced men and women who held the fate of the alien officers and the colony in their hands. Holden, the head judge, rose slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We have heard the evidence. We have considered the arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. It is now our solemn duty to render a verdict." Donovan felt his heart pounding in his chest as the judge paused, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. The defendants, Commander Vrax and his fellow officers, have been found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a roar of approval from the human colonists. Donovan felt a surge of relief, his muscles finally releasing the tension that had been coiled within him for the duration of the trial. But even as the cheers and applause subsided, Holden raised a hand, silencing the room. However, given the complex cultural and ethical issues that have been raised during these proceedings, the judges have decided to temper the sentences with a measure of leniency. Donovan felt his stomach twist, and he could see the same mixture of confusion and disappointment etched on the faces of the human colonists. Sinclair, meanwhile, wore a faint smile, her eyes gleaming with a sense of triumph. "The defendants will be sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 50 years, Holden continued, his voice steady and impassive. "This decision was not made lightly, but we believe it represents a balanced approach that acknowledges the gravity of the crimes committed, while also recognizing the broader cultural and political context that shaped the events on Arcadia." As the judges filed out of the courtroom, the human colonists erupted into a cacophony of voices, their anger and disappointment palpable. Donovan stood silently, his mind racing as he grappled with the implications of the verdict. Sinclair approached him, her expression one of calculated triumph. "Well, Prosecutor Donovan, it seems that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, the judges were not willing to cast aside the principles of fairness and due process. A rather impressive feat, don't you think?" Donovan gritted his teeth, his hands clenching into fists. "This is a travesty of justice, Sinclair. Those monsters deserve to rot in a cell for the rest of their miserable lives, not be given the chance of parole. You and your clients have manipulated the system, twisted the narrative to your advantage." Sinclair's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a barely concealed contempt. "The law is not always about justice, Prosecutor. It is about balance, about recognizing the nuances and complexities that shape the human experience. Your narrow-minded desire for retribution blinded you to the bigger picture." Donovan opened his mouth to retort, but the words caught in his throat. He knew that, on some level, Sinclair was right. The trial had exposed the deep-seated cultural divisions between the human colonists and the alien Imperium, and the judges had clearly struggled to find a solution that would satisfy both sides. As Donovan watched the alien officers being escorted from the courtroom, a sense of unease settled in the pit of his stomach. The future of the human colony on Arcadia remained uncertain, and he knew that the scars left by the invasion would take time to heal. But Donovan also knew that he and his people were resilient, that they would rise to the challenge and forge a path forward, even in the face of such adversity. The battle may have been lost, but the war for the colony's future was far from over.